You're listening to Data Center Therapy. Please take a number, and an engineer will be right with you.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Data Center Therapy, a podcast from Ivoxy Consulting that talks all things IT with a healthy dose of empathy. I am your host, Matt Yette, and I'm joined by my very frequent co-host, Mr. Matt Cozzolino. Matt, how are you doing?
Hello, I'm great. How are you, Mr. Yette?
I'm feeling a little insecure.
Oh,
you
look
see
at
what
that.
I did there.
Look at
Yeah.
that.
Yep. Yeah. We can't all be comedians in our day jobs.
Not outsecure?
Well, it depends on what layer you're trying to secure.
There we go. Yeah.
And at the outer shell of everything is what you consider to be the edge, right? We hear about this edge and edge computing, and VMware's got a hypervisor now that runs on what, network cards? Or something, right?
Yeah, I mean,
the SmartNIC.
Yeah, we're pushing compute and offload into all of the stuff, and I think, yeah, you've actually got a more generic CPU on some of those new network cards that they're defining, so you can offload even more random whatever, right?
Yeah, it's a tangent, but it almost feels like this push to the edge is a way to get data closer to you wherever you are. And right now, I almost feel like, 640K should be enough for anybody. You can never say, I can't see this helping at any point. You just can't say it. You just have to assume that it's gonna prove you wrong. But right now, it feels like the only application I can really think that level, and I'm guessing it's a latency thing at that point, right? The only thing I can see gained is gaming and game streaming. The idea of these streaming services where your game video is streamed to your iPad, but your controller button presses get sent up to the cloud, and then
Right. I guess it depends on the game you're playing, because if you're playing an online game with other people, you spinning to the left still has to be sent to the person you're playing with or whatever, right?
Yeah, the Call of Duty quickscopers can't snipe me, or they do still anyway, but
just because we're not good doesn't.
Right, the timing is an easy blame right now. I can say the lag got me, but if it's all even across the board, then I have no excuse for my lack of skill.
Well, right, and that's the thing is, right, if you're still on the other side of the country, my scope zoom whatever still has to get across the country. Right,
86 milliseconds or whatever. So, now, is that what maybe not gaming specifically, but is that kind of the push to the edge, is just lower latency, closer to the consumer kind of desire? Is that really what's driving a lot of that movement?
I don't think it's necessarily a latency thing personally. I think it's more along the lines of the silicone is becoming commoditized now, right? So we've got these Raspberry Pis that you can run your whole home server environment off of. When we talk about our home lab stuff, you read about guys running, I've got my 4 Raspberry Pis sitting over here running everything that's automating my house, blah. You've got commodity hardware like that you could slap onto a network adapter, and now rather than having to process that entire TCP stack in your CPU, you can offload it to the network adapter itself. So it can
guess a network adapter is the common point, right? If it's connected, it's plugged into a network. And you can assume power at that point, and you can assume connectivity. So you can just keep pushing it out, because there's always going to be a network cable if it's on the network.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
I think so.
The logical place for it, I guess, right?
Yeah, I guess it's, I look at it more along the lines of, what are we asking the network to do, right? So we've got NSX, right? We got this software-defined network inside of the VMware environment, and to do that routing, to do those security functions, to do all of that kind of stuff takes CPU time, and CPU time is what I'm dedicating to virtual machines. So if I'm stealing VM CPU time to do work that should be network level, then here's a dedicated piece of hardware to do that. Same reason you get your graphics card to do your 3D gaming or whatever, right?
Sure. So, I mean, that kind of, we touched on it a little bit ago, that this is our bite-sized episode is going to be focused on the edge today, and what the edge means and what you can do with the edge. traditionally, again, we go back, and I'm not picking on Cisco, but I'm picking on Cisco, the ASA, which it was so ubiquitous for so many years, built upon the PICs,
and
which
then the ASA, yeah.
Yep. And I think people spoke about it not so lovingly, and at the same time, everyone was using it, right? Everyone had an ASA.
It was the thing. It was
right.
If you wanted a firewall and you wanted the bee's knees of firewalls, you'd get an ASA because it would do everything and anything you'd want it to. Yeah.
And that Java-based ASDM, which we all learned to love. but I bet you could still work your way around it, though, right? There was a certain level of comfort in the ugliness of it, where it's like, I just know this is how I do it.
I know how ugly this baby is, right?
Right. You don't look over that crib and act shocked, like a little Seinfeld reference there. But we are way past that, and I think even Cisco realizes that the ASA is kind of, old guard legacy, and we've moved into a very modern approach to security. But when you think ASA and you think legacy firewalls, you think rule sets,
right?
Access lists,
and the new one now is the next generation firewall, which to me
we've heard that for a while now.
Right, to me has meant I'm making my firewall rules more than just what IP are you coming from, what port are you coming from, what IP are you going to, what port are you going to, right?
Does that also include integration with other systems that could say, maybe that's all you do still? Maybe it's still, yes, you can go there, or no, you can't. But I'm going to listen to my friend, the antivirus package over here, that tells me a little bit more about the endpoint or what's going on, and maybe I can dynamically change those rules if I see things that don't make me happy.
I want to see more of that personally. I think that makes more sense. And when we're talking about
that's holistic, right?
Yeah, when we're talking about like, here's that ecosystem I'm going to buy into. I'm going to buy all PAN stuff because I can run the Cortex and I can run the IPS stuff and I can run the firewall and they can all talk to each other and I can track events across them. That's the thing that I want to see. But really, I think that's more along the lines of like, where you're kicking your logs out to your SIEM and what actions is it taking when it finds something that it needs to quarantine, right?
Intrusion detection versus truly prevention, the IDS to IPS looking at too. That's that whole holistic system. So when I think of next-gen firewalls, I think, okay, instead of just access lists, instead of I say you're allowed on port 443, I also might be able to interrogate that traffic on the way in and say, okay, yeah, that's a web request to, a secure HTTPS port, but it looks like you've got some SQL injection query language in there. So I'm trying to break into that PHP page and drop you to the shell.
That's kind of different. That's kind of two different things going on there. The next generation firewall and the layer 7 rules are absolutely that. You add another, I really want to say another tuple to your security. I don't know if that's even the right word, to your security rule. So source address of any or port address of any, destination, my public interface, destination port 80 or 443, and the traffic has to be categorized as HTTP or HTTPS, right? Because if you think about it, I could do a firewall rule that says incoming on port 80 goes to my FTP server, and it's FTP traffic. So with an older firewall rule, allow source or allow destination port 80, it's just port 80. It's literally that, right? It doesn't look at what that traffic is.
Kind of the old school fix-up command, though, also, because doesn't that enforce protocol standardization? Do you remember fix-up on the PIXs at least?
Oh God, no.
I just remember from mail server standpoint.
I vaguely remember the name, but no, I'd have to look at what that was actually doing. I don't think that's what it was because we haven't had that layer 7 application level inspection until fairly recent, right?
So it's a level of inspection, and fix-up was the PIX, and with the ASA, it was replaced by modular policy framework. So it's a policy map to inspect the traffic, and from what I recall, it holds it to the standard of this is what this protocol looks like.
Okay.
And if it doesn't, knock it down.
Okay, so
Which
that sounds
isn't
fairly
really
early.
what we're talking. Yes, but it's not what we're talking about modern-wise. But that feels like that was the early attempt. At
we're
something
getting
like that.
there. We're heading that way to, hey, it's on 80, so it should look like HTTP traffic, right? That kind of a thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I noticed some of the problems as protocols advanced and a use case of protocols advanced. We got to the point where it's like, oh, just turn off fix up. That'll fix that.
Right.
Turn off your security. Great.
Yeah. I mean, so that problem that turn off fix up was solving, you still kind of run into. You like when you're looking at those layer 7 rules, you still have to have that traffic categorized. So that initial TCP handshake is not, where does the firewall get enough information about that traffic flow to be able to say, yes, this is this application, or no, this isn't, right? There's still got to be some level of monitoring, level of inspection of it before it can categorize it correctly.
And if you're hosting any secured by certificate services behind that firewall, the firewall needs to know about that. If it's going to be layer 7, it needs to have that cert basically and do the handoff more or less, right? To be able to crack that packet open.
Kind of. So we can categorize a lot of. So the most time I've spent with those layer 7 firewall rules have been on a Palo, and I can write my layer 7 rule without having to do HTTPS decryption on the firewall itself. Yeah. So there's enough without actually cracking open that packet to be able to categorize it as. You look at some of the categories. It's here's Google, here's Gmail, here's
interesting.
Here's Google Calendar, here's Drive, here's Facebook Chat, here, right? All of those are different categories that we can look at and categorize before we actually start opening up that packet and taking a look inside of it. Yeah.
Now, it must be doing that from the headers, though. It must be doing that from the source, and it can't. Obviously, I mean, otherwise the packet's encrypted. The idea is you can't fingerprint that to categorize because that's a pretty weak encryption.
Well, there's things like your SSL cert is signed by someone specific, right? Your SSL cert is a Google cert, and you can see that this is encrypted with that before that traffic comes in.
That's true. I was going to say there have to be some legible pieces of information. Mm-hmm. They're not gleaning that from the encrypted packet.
Right. There's also outside of just the packet itself, there's how the application handshakes, what it talks like, what it's asking for, what kind of things come up after that initial socket gets turned up, right? All of that.
Interesting.
Yeah. So
that gives you some intelligence to it. That's good. I mean, that's what we're hoping some of these products do for us. Very interesting.
Yeah.
All right. So what's the best approach then at the edge? What we've talked about the multi-layered security. We've talked about holistic approach, and there's a lot of components to it, right? Mm-hmm. But when I'm thinking about the edge, what are the things that should be top of mind?
So I think that there's room for a couple of different things in an overarching design of an environment. We've talked about treating your users the same, whether they're on-prem or off-prem. That kind of, you can buzzword that and say, bring your own device, trust no one, zero trust environment, that kind of stuff. I think my recommendation would be to put all of your secure data in a fortress and have guards patrolling that fortress. It used to be just that I buy my big firewall and it's my perimeter, and as long as I keep everyone outside of that perimeter, then I'm secure. But now we got people traipsing around on the inside, so we got to protect that as well. So that you still should have that wall, that outside edge, and do more inspection and security policy inside as well.
So here's a weird thing, and I'm sure, I know this is still a thing. It's just a lot of people don't like to talk about it because of the increase in responsibility for IT. Mm-hmm. Outgoing web proxy. This was all the rage in like the early to mid 2000s. What was the one brand that
An
I used to work for? A consulting
explicit
company in New York.
proxy with like Barracuda or something.
Yeah, you know what? The big name was in the early 2000s was Blue Coat. Remember Blue Coat?
Blue Coat.
And I remember we used to
I
sell
want to
Blue
say I
Coat.
saw like signs or ads in like SeaTac for them.
Maybe
all
we
places.
sold a ton of Blue Coat because it was freaking awesome. It was almost effortless to sell because you put you put it up and you say, yeah, this is a problem. This was NIMDA, SQL Slammer, all of these worms, and people would click and that'd be it. It was XP time, right? So and then I remember Blue Coat basically saw their success and basically overnight said, oh, we're going to quadruple our prices. And that was basically you don't hear about Blue Coat so much. I mean, yeah, it's out there, but I think about it as, outgoing proxies are kind of a no-brainer because really the weak point in almost every single security incident is a user action. A lot of times we're really guarded against we've got the security, but if you are determined to crash your server, if you're determined to delete that file, if you're determined to click that link, there's little in the way of a technological solution that'll stop you from doing so. So why don't we hear more about outgoing proxies, Matt? Why, like, you know what I mean? Like, I've heard people get scared, like, boy, now everything goes through us, and now why can't I get on that site and this and that? And they'd rather just let it all out than deal with the overhead of that.
I think there's a couple of different things at play there. It's amusing that you've brought that up because I've got a project coming up that's going to be kind of replace that explicit proxy, and I think the change is because of how something like that Blue Coat or how that explicit proxy works specifically, and that is that you have to configure your endpoint to send the traffic to that device to be proxied, right? You can write rules that say you can write like a firewall rule that says if it doesn't come through that proxy, don't let it out, which is a thing. But your endpoint has to know that this is the configuration and respect that configuration and send the appropriate traffic to that. One of the things I'd heard about in some of the security stuff I've gone to and seen and done is DNS egress of stolen data. So if you think about that, like, I can bypass the DNS server that's configured on the machine and query some public DNS address with a string at some name that I bought yesterday and exfil data with DNS queries that way. Specifically because I'm just, my little worm that got installed on this machine is querying whatever I tell it to, not what the system is configured with. You run into that same issue with an explicit proxy and how that's configured, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't do it right, though, I think what you do is, well, first of all, a lot of people are loath to put the explicit proxy inline. What you're talking about, that HTTP redirection, traffic redirection, right? It has to be honored, but it has to happen unless you basically put the proxy inline. Then anything going out that line will have to pass through this box. But I think a lot of people don't love that. I don't either. I don't like putting a lot of points of failure along my main line. So, okay, so let's say you've got that redirection. Well, then at the firewall, you just say, only this box is allowed to query out on these ports. Anybody else trying to go around it, nope, you're not getting out. So, I mean, there's ways to do that. I think also it's an uncomfortable position for employees in an office to, hey, you're seeing all my traffic.
Well, okay,
the company's not wrong. But no, people get.
If I'm on a work computer, then I'm assuming that everything I'm doing is seen by work, right?
No, I'm not saying it's not
kind of a
normal.
level
It's
set
just
there.
people get. But then you've also got now, if you're out of the office and working, which is what you and I have done basically the entire time we've been at Ivoxy. If we're not at a customer site or at a meeting, we're at home in our home offices. Then again, there's the way we approach it. There's not any Ivoxy infrastructure that we're touching that we're going to infect either. We're our home networks to the internet kind of thing. But with a corporate environment and a data center and somebody VPNing in, and then you got split tunnel, that's a whole other thing, and you can't control employee's home internet connection.
Right, which is kind of that from that management point of view. That's kind of the mindset that I'm referring to. Is if I treat the office just like your home network, then my security policy is just I've got to let this user connect to this device, and I secure that this application, and I secure that application. Period. That's outside of or not that that's outside, but that's a broader, or that's an easier thing to do, right? Is I treat my data center as an environment. You mentioned SQL injection stuff. That's a little bit of a different thing than a firewall itself. That's a web application firewall, and that's actually inbound traffic proxying on something like an F5.
Okay, is that not a next gen? Does a next gen firewall not do that?
That's different.
Okay, because I know some people would claim that, we're a next gen firewall. We do like the blurring of the terms. I think happens a lot too in the advertised feature set.
There's a bunch of overlap, but that's really a different thing. You have to be looking at. You actually have to terminate that SSL session, right? We aren't looking at just the packet itself. We're looking at the SQL data, the SQL query, the what's coming into my form fields that I'm filling, and scrubbing that.
So in that consideration, you're looking at something like a PAN at your edge, and then that passes along to an F5 cluster behind that then handles all the web traffic and the stuff behind it. So that's kind of a load balancer, reverse proxy security. I struggled with that. I don't know how to talk about it. I run a website. It's next January. We'll be celebrating its 20th year in service. It's a Dave Matthews Band fan site, right? So I was in college, hardcore fan, went nuts, and I'm like, hey, I can kind of scratch my nerd back about hosting and programming, and I've got an app in the iOS store and all of this stuff. I love podcasting. All these things that I like to do, this site allows me to scratch all those hobby itches, which is cool. SQL injection, big problem. Big problem. It's PHP, and so all the script written code, we're doing all this awesome stuff, but I'm looking at my logs and I see, that's interesting. What is select union and all these escape characters? And so there was some good time spent years and years ago doing a lot of input scrubbing and sanitizing. But it's just, it's just a web query. That's all it is. And all you need to do is be running a software package that has one bit of a vulnerability, and you are completely owned.
Yep. Little Johnny drop tables.
Yeah. So thankfully we've been ahead of the curve. But I had one Russian hacker or whatever just said, I saw you've got it. Here's your table structure, and I saw the queries where he had done it, and I immediately shut that down. And I was like, okay. I'm just trying to be nice. Why are you being a jerk? I'm going to charge you $1,000. Okay. No, you're not.
Yeah.
That was it. Thankfully, we got out of there. No Bitcoin or anything. But yeah, so tell me a little bit about SSL decryption, Matt.
So, kind of back to what we were talking about about the forward, not the forward proxy, the explicit outbound proxy. The thing I see more now instead of that explicit proxy is SSL decrypt on the firewall for outbound traffic. And it still takes some touching of the endpoint itself, because what's happening is we're again terminating that full session on the firewall and reestablishing it to the client. So what that means is I have to sign a certificate that says google.com and sign it with the CA that is trusted by your organization. Right now, google.com is something like VeriSign or something. And you don't have a VeriSign cert that's trusted by... You do have a VeriSign cert, but you don't have a CA to be able to re-sign Google.
You're not authoritative for that.
Right. So you have to stand up that CA infrastructure and then install that trusted root cert on all of the endpoints. And then at that point, you can actually crack open that HTTPS packet and look inside of it. That's the one when we're talking about outbound traffic and packet inspection that's even deeper than that layer 7 firewall rule. That's the kind of way that I'm seeing most customers get to that today, is by doing that certificate signing of public certs.
Endorsed man in the middle attacking, more or less, basically.
That's exactly
Yeah.
what it is. Yeah.
Well, it's a lot to handle. My mind's a little melted even after the short kind of interval here, but there is a lot to worry about, and I think that's the kind of point where getting all the smart people in the room, getting all of our heads together, and discussing what those risks are and how to best approach them and the practical effects of them. Look, I mean, yeah, shut everything down, don't let any traffic out. That's great. How am I going to do my work, boss? Like, there's has to be that balance, and I think we're well equipped to kind of go on both our expertise and our hunger for knowledge plugged into the industry and seeing all of the environments out there and how, for me, I learn how not to do things. That's how I learn how to do things.
Right. Yeah.
Because if you eliminate enough bad things, you get to the good thing, right? So, we have a lot of experience seeing what has been out there and what is out there and what kind of problems need to be solved. So I think that's why we're uniquely equipped to assist on things like this.
I'd agree with that.
Thanks for rapping me about security again this morning. I feel less insecure,
security.
Matt. I feel less
There you
insecure. I feel more secure. I'm going to start calling you my security blanket.
There you go.
Aw.
Keep you nice and warm.
Thanks for joining me this morning, Matt. And thanks everybody out there for listening to yet another episode of Data Center Therapy. Have a great day.